Well, thank you very much. I hope you don't believe everything he says. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. You already were welcomed by Mrs. Neumann from the European Parliament. I'm not a staff member of the European Parliament. I just look fancy. And so I'm an external speaker who once in a while is hired to do presentations like that. And I would like to introduce you a bit to the European Union. Of course, I mean, European Union is a bigger topic. You know, there are whole studies are so-called European studies, where you can dive into the European Union. We don't have that much time, you know, because these studies last for something between 3 and 5 years. And maybe you have other plans for the rest of your life. But I would like to give you a short info, and then we have the chance to discuss it. When I talked to your office, Mrs. Vinus, are you here?
Yes, she's not, unfortunately.
Ah, so what did you do to her?
She's having behind the computer screen.
Ah, okay, good. And I called her yesterday and said, okay, what's up? Who the hell is coming there? And she said, well, I should focus on two things, and this is the founding story of the European Union and a bit about the values. And I think this gives us a good introduction then into a discussion. We have about an hour for this discussion. Afterwards, I would recommend highly that you see the exhibition in this house, which is downstairs. It's in all 24 languages, 24 official languages of the European Union. And you get a lot of information, you can push buttons, and you get even some material. So it's really worthwhile. There's a short film, and if you set aside a couple of minutes to have a look at this exhibition. Okay, so what's the founding story of the European Union, which came into existence as European communities? Well, in a late summer, early evening, a couple of old and wise gentlemen were sitting together having a glass of red wine and enjoying their cigar, and they were talking about culture, opera, a bit about history, philosophy, about their women, of course. And then they said, okay, hey, we like each other so much, so great, we are a community, why don't we found a European community? This is a nice soap opera. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, it's complete rubbish. Yeah? Because the European Union is not founded on love and trust, but on hate and mistrust. And this is the European Union's big achievement. If you look at the situation we had in Europe in 1945, what had happened? There was the Second World War, ignited by Germany, with something between 60 and 70 million killed people. But the Second World War had started only 20 years after the end of the First World War. 21 years, to be very exact, you know, just for the historians among you. And also the First World War was an extremely cruel war with about 17 million people killed. And there were only 20 years in between. Now, for many of you, 20 years is a long time. But I can tell you, you know, once you're getting older, you find out 20 years is nothing. So what was the situation in 1945? Germany finally was defeated. Germany was occupied by the occupation powers, one of them the United States. But Germany was still there. And the question was, of course, what's going to happen? And the French said, okay, we have the experience, 20 years, 55, 65, the Germans will be back. So how do we make sure that after the First World War and the Second World War, there will not be a Third World War? How do we protect ourselves? the first attempt was the classical attempt. Since we feel threatened by the Germans, we form an alliance against them, which came into existence in 1948, the so-called Brussels Pact. Can forget about it, never played a role. You know, but the Brussels Pact has in its statutes to beware of a potential new German aggression and to defend the member states against that. So this was the old thinking. You know, I feel threatened, I form an alliance against this threat. The problem is the other side sees I'm forming an alliance and says, aha, what's going on here? So I better also protect myself. I see you're protecting yourself. I say, this is what I knew from the beginning, you know, she's aggressive. And so I buy some weapons. She is buying some weapons. So what is she doing? You know, okay, as an American, she doesn't buy weapons, she already has weapons, but for all the others, you know, she's buying weapons, and so on. So this was the old thinking. The new thinking and the new approach of the European Union, of what's today the European Union, was to guarantee security not against each other, but with each other. I don't know whether some of you watch boxing. I stopped watching boxing after Klitschko retired. But if you watch boxing sometimes and then, or you put the TV set on in round 9, then you see two boxers hugging each other. And if you switch on the TV set at that moment, you think, oh, they really love each other, huh? No, they don't love each other. They hold each other. And if I hold the other boxer, then he cannot box me. The only problem is, come on, it's never too late. Yeah. I don't know where you want to go, but here you're right. Yeah, okay. Bring your friends, very good. Oh, more to come. Okay. Good, so the last bus has arrived. And but while I'm holding the other boxer, he cannot box me, but I also cannot box him. A bit on the back, you know, it's not important. So this was the basic idea of the European Union. Do you really think that in 1945, 46, 47, after a war with 60 to 70 million killed people, millions of them killed in a fabricated way in concentration camps with big parts of Europe destroyed, do you really think there was a single Frenchman sitting in the bed and saying, oh, I love the Germans? No way, Jose. Of course not. So, but the basic idea was we have to protect ourselves from a German danger, and the best way to do it is with the Germans. That's the basic idea, and therefore you can say the European Union is the response to war, the extermination of minorities. You're all aware of the Holocaust, but there were also other minorities, you know, heavily persecuted, and to dictatorship, of course, because dictatorship was the prerequisite for the war. You know, before Germany started the war in 1939, there was 6 years war against their own people. Yeah? So in the Nazi dictatorship. So this was the founding ideas, and this was how Berlin looked like in 1945. And this is what everybody had in mind, you know, when the concentration camps were opened and the pictures went through the world. I mean, this did not really make the Germans more famous, or made them famous, but not in a positive way. And this has to do with this gentleman. And the other dictator in Europe, Joseph Stalin, you know. And so the EU, once again, it started with the European Community on Coal and Steel, and it was transferred officially in 1993 into the European Union, but it's, so to say, the same child with different names, you know? So European Community is the maiden name, and now European Union is the new name. The European Union is the response to war, extermination, and dictatorship, and it is a response to the security dilemma, and the security dilemma was that Germany is too big for Europe, but too small to be a superpower. And you have to deal with that. And the European integration was the way to do that. But since the EU was the response to war and dictatorship, the values we refer to, they are not the decoration of an economic alliance. The European Union is one of the most important economic alliances in the world. No doubt about that. But at the end of the day, it's not the economy, stupid, just to quote the former president. But American president, you know, German presidents don't speak English. But the economy was always the instrument to reach the political goals. And you can see that through the whole history of the European Union. And this was true for the founding. This was true also later for the enlargements. This was true also for the currency union. Maybe if you're interested, we can come to the currency union, the euro, later during our discussion. So, but what you have to see clearly is economy is extremely important, but economy is the instrument. And every time when the European communities, union, had to make a choice between economy and politics, it chose politics. This is true for the southern enlargement in the 80s. The reason was to stabilize southern Europe, membership of Greece and then Spain and Portugal. This was true for the eastern enlargement. This is true for the enlargement discussion we have at the moment with the Western Balkans. You know, I mean, why are we in favor of the enlargement with a Western Balkan countries? It's not that everybody here says, oh, I love the Serbs so much and it would be so good if we had many Albanians here or whatsoever. No, but it's very clear this is a fragile region, and the best way to stabilize this region is take it into the family. You know, and for political reasons, not for economic reasons. I don't want to sound arrogant, but for economic reasons, we don't need Kosovo. You know, and so it's as easy as that, and they have to buy our Mercedes anyway because they don't have their own car production. By the way, buying a Mercedes is always a good idea, or you also can buy a BMW or a Volkswagen. It's a democratic country, you have a choice. You know, democracy is always having choices. So the values are the basis. I mean, all institutions have a chapter about values, blah, blah, and then, you know, they do the real business. Here, it's different. Here, the values are the real business, and they are the fundament of the European Union. And now this is from my textbook, How Not to Use PowerPoint. Because what you never should do is put a lot of text on the screen which nobody can read, but you don't have to read, you just have to see that I know it. Because this is the preamble of the first treaty of the first European community. This was the European Community in coal and steel. Why coal and steel? Coal was what's nowadays oil, gas, hopefully in the soon future renewables, but at that time it was energy. And steel, of course, meant heavy industry, meant rebuilding and restructuring the continent, and of course also armament. So therefore the first initiative was to control coal and steel in this European community jointly and to administer it jointly, to make sure that this will not be the next conflict between Germany and France. So this was all about Germany and France. The other countries which joined in from the beginning on, which was Italy, and then a country which is called Benelux. And if you look at it, you find out it's 3 different countries, you know, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. But in the core, it was all about Germany and France. This is why still today, Germany and France play a special role in the European Union. Besides the fact that they are the 2 biggest economies and the 2 biggest countries in the Union. But in the beginning, it was all about them. But if you read the preamble, you know what a preamble is, you know, and it's legally not part of the treaty, but it gives you the direction of the treaty. It tells you what the treaty is all about. And if you read the preamble of the treaty, and this is the whole preamble, so, you know, wouldn't keep you busy all night, then you find out there is not a single word about coal and steel. You know, it says, considering that world peace may be safeguarded only by creative efforts equal to the dangers which menace it. It says, resolve to substitute for historic rivalries a fusion of their essential interests to establish by creating an economic community the foundation of a broad and independent community among peoples long divided by bloody conflicts, and to lay the basis of institutions capable of giving direction to their future common destiny. So what you see here very clearly, this is not a treaty on coal and steel. Coal and steel is the instrument. It's a treaty to bring the European peoples, at this time Germany and France, plus some neighbors, in the first step together. Once again, you know, I quote myself, I love quoting myself because then I know it's correct. Economy is the instrument, politics is the goal. And this goes back, of course, to the values then of the French Revolution. You know that, you know, liberté, égalité, fraternité, which means liberty, equality, and fraternité, brotherhood, you nowadays would translate by solidarity. This is what it meant, you know. And so this is the general basis of the European Union, you could say, of the European societies, although not at all times all societies were sticking to these values, talking about Germany, but in this respect also other European countries. So now if you look at our newest treaty, it's the so-called Lisbon Treaty. So I don't want to bore you with legal details, but the EU is based on 2 treaties. This is the Treaty on the European Union, which is giving the general picture, so to say, and it's the Treaty on the functioning of the European Union, which gives more details. So in this respect, the Lisbon Treaty is not a treaty, but it's an amendment to the treaty. And here it's an amendment to the Treaty on the European Union. And here in Article 2, you'll find once again the rule. The Union is founded on the values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. It's very important because in Europe, you don't have a single state without minorities. You know, because, I mean, there were people who never left their village and lived in 3 different countries. You know, because just the borders had changed. So, minority rights is a very important thing, because it's also a source of rivalries and tensions, of course, till today. Hungary, Romania, for example, Hungary, Slovakia, about the Hungarian minorities and so on. It's a different topic. So, once again, what are the values? Respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, and the rule of law. Rule of law is extremely important because we have our experiences with countries without rule of law. I mean, also historically, we have some trouble at the moment with some countries in the EU about respecting the rule of law. But generally speaking, after the Nazi dictatorship, after some other dictatorships in Europe, facing Stalinism in the Soviet Union, everybody knew rule of law is very important. And, of course, the respect for human rights. That's the basis for everything. So, once again, the Lisbon Treaty, it says these values are common to all member states. In a society, now there come more values, which pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between women and men prevail. So this is all Article 2, Article 1 says we're founding a European Union. And here, once again, pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between women and men. Nowadays, you would probably broaden that. We have lots of discussions at the moment about transgender and non-binary people and so on and so on. So, but I would say in 2009, this was not a topic in public discussion, but nowadays I would say this includes that, and what is meant is equality between people of all sexes or sexual orientations, however they define themselves. So, all I told you sounds a bit like the public relations brochure of the European Parliament, which is not. And the question is, how does it work? And now, ladies and gentlemen, I reveal the secret. The European Union is, as I said, tremendously complicated. Tremendously complicated. But nonetheless, you can explain it with one word. And this word is supranationality. Supranationality. That's the key. This means we shift part of our national sovereignty on the European level, and we exercise this sovereignty jointly. This is the basic principle of the European Union. This means we decide together, but once we have decided, this binds all members. Marriage is a good example for supranationality, by the way. I mean, I'm not kidding. I could not grab a doggy on the street and come home with a dog under my arm and tell my wife, "Oh, honey, we now have a dog." My wife would say, "You're crazy." So, which means I'm not sovereign enough to decide myself whether I want to have a dog. My sovereignty is limited by my wife's sovereignty. But the good thing is, there's no risk that I come home later and my wife says, "Oh, honey, we now have birds." And you have 5 ugly birds in your living room. And so, supranationality. Part of the national sovereignty goes to the European level and is exercised jointly there. The prerequisite for that is, of course, that at the end of the day, after all discussions and trouble and what you have in the EU, and we have discussions and trouble and arguments every single day in the European Union. Fruitful cooperation, called Macron that 2 or 3 days ago when he disagreed with our Federal Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. You probably know we have a new Chancellor. Yeah, every 16 years we have a new. We're relatively consequent on that, So the supranationality, ladies and gentlemen, this is the principle. And so the EU is not harmony. The EU is not we love each other. The EU is conflicts, is different interests, is arguments, is trouble, is compromise. Compromise is a European virtue, of course, because at the end of the day, I mean, it's very obvious. With 27 countries, you always have to make compromises. You know, we have northern and southern countries, we have western and eastern countries, we have small and big countries, we have agricultural countries, industrial countries, we have countries which for a long time were busy killing each other. So of course we have conflicts every day. At the end we have to come to a compromise, and if we don't find a compromise, then we have to go to the European Court, and the European Court has to make a decision, but then everybody has to obey that. In the moment, we have some trouble at the moment with our Hungarian friends about that, but if this really will not work anymore, then the EU is history. You know, because we don't have a European FBI which could go to Budapest and arrest Mr. Orban. Although, maybe not a bad idea, but now you say it. You know, we don't have Eurocops. At the end of the day, we're a community of rights and justice, and we depend on the fact that, once again, like in a marriage, at the end of the day, you find a compromise, or you find a solution, but then you have to stick to it. So supranationality is the word, and these are the three words you should remember from our discussion, which didn't give you much room by now to say something, is peace and democracy as the principal values in a set of values. Number one, the values are not decoration, they are the purpose of the whole thing. Economy is the instrument, it's not the other way around. And supranationality is the way to come to this goal. So, once again, the European Union in a nutshell is the European Union is a supranational union of countries and peoples to safeguard peace and democracy in Europe. Period. I have another presentation with lots of details. I can entertain you until tomorrow morning, but it's not true. You know, I have an appointment in the Italian restaurant tonight. I won't miss that. You know, I really appreciate that you're here, but compared to truffle noodles, okay, different story. So maybe we have a cut here. For your questions, remarks, comments, criticisms, you can say it's all wrong. Please, the floor is yours.
So as always, if you could raise your hand and then briefly introduce yourself when making the comment or question would be great. Now's our chance. We've been holding it inside all day. It's been an action-packed day, so I'm sure Professor Dr. Stratenschulte would be very pleased. Who would like to go first?
I mean, if not, folks, I have lots of presentations, you know.
The first hand is coming from Los Angeles.
Well, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. I was wondering, you know, probably this kind of unity with the European Union probably is not going to stop that continent. It's probably going to keep growing, and maybe in a different way than the model that we have in the UN. Maybe more of a model like with the Union. Because as you point out, it's not because every country loves every other country. It's not that kind of a thing, even though that sounds nice.
Yeah.
But it's because it's a means of protecting, and there's that tension of rivalry. So it has kind of supranational. It's above nations. I think that the same kind of model might be for the future world.
Well, at the moment, Europe keeps us busy, you know. Well, what's true is, and what's important, you want to step in immediately, or
No.
you want me to answer first?
No. I was just, if you didn't see...
Okay, I asked 2 questions, she said no, so to which question did she say no now?
I'll take that question afterwards.
Okay, good. So what's very important to see is that the European Union always was open to all European countries. This is what the European Treaty says. All European countries can apply can apply for the membership in the European Union. The problem is, the treaty doesn't say what's a European country. And here we have, you could ask a couple of questions, because geographically, Europe is the western peninsula of Asia. You know, so there is no clear border to the east. And there is a good question, discussion we had over the years is Turkey. You know, is Turkey a European country or not? If you're in Istanbul, where you should go because it's a beautiful city, and then you cross the Bosporus, and there is a big sign, "Welcome to Asia." So, and the biggest part of Turkey is beyond the Bosporus. So is this a European country or not? So at the moment this doesn't play a role, because the accession negotiations with Turkey are not only in freeze but in deep freeze after Mr. Erdogan turned politically into a very authoritarian way of governing, to put it very diplomatically, since you're here in the Diplomatic Studies Center. So, principle open for all countries. Now, this was a problem. You know, it's very easy. I have a 3-bedroom apartment. I have lots of friends in America. And I write to all of them, "Hey, come and visit me. I have an extra guest room. You can come and blah, and bring your wife, your husband, or your I don't know what, you know." And then once in a while somebody comes and visits me, I put him up in the guest room, perfect. Now, suddenly I get an email, and they say, "Hey, we all come together. You know, we hired a plane, we all come together." And then I have to say, "Oops, I'm not prepared for that." So this was a bit the situation of the European Union. Before the wall came down, which happened around the corner here, before the dissolution of the Soviet Union, it was easy to say we're open to all European countries, because most of the European countries couldn't come anyway. You know, this is good. I mean, I love to invite you if I know you're in Australia and you don't have any money, and I, you know, can send you one email after the other. How beautiful it were if I had you here, but I know no risk. So, and then, because the first enlargements we had was the Western enlargement, Great Britain, Denmark, Ireland in 1973, then the Southern enlargement, once again for political reasons, to stabilize Southern Europe, Greece 981, Portugal and Spain 86, but this was all right. Then the wall came down, and then the former neutral countries, or neutralized countries, Austria, Sweden, Finland, said, okay, the East-West conflict is over, and if there is no conflict, you can't be neutral. Doesn't make sense, you only can be neutral if there are two parties, you know, fighting each other. So we come, no problem. Small countries, rich countries, established democracies, you know, no problem. So, and then we had the Big Bang. Suddenly all the Central European countries said, oh, we also want to join the European Union. And then we had this so-called Big Bang enlargement in 2004, when 8 Central Eastern countries, plus Malta and Cyprus, joined the European Union. 3 of them former Soviet republics, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And 2 more were to come 3 years later, Bulgaria and Romania. So suddenly we had 27 members. Then came Croatia, it was 28. Now the Brits have left the bus, and I'm not sure how happy this will make them, but this is their decision, you know, and they have, as you know, every month a new prime minister to discuss it with him. And so, yeah. Okay, this was overdoing. I mean, this trust was 45 days in office, you know, not only 30. So, but then the problem was, and is, sir, every new member has new neighbors, So, you know, I invite you to a party, but all of you bring a friend. So I invite 10 people, suddenly I have 20 there. So what am I doing with the friends? And what we have in the European Union, sorry, it's a long answer, but this is what I always wanted to say and never everybody was interested in. We had a situation that we said we cannot take all these countries because it was only less stable and more fragile countries asking for the EU membership. And in the European Union, you have something which is called enlargement fatigue. So, which means the citizens of the EU countries say, come on, enough is enough. You know? So, and this is why for years now also the enlargement process with the Western Balkan countries was not really speeded up, to put it that way. It has also to do with the countries themselves, no doubt about that. But you know, we're not talking about Switzerland and Norway. We would take them immediately. Iceland once had applied for EU membership, and they were in a good way. Then they said, "Oh, sorry, crisis is over. We take our application back." So this is I'm not talking beyond Europe. So what do we have at the moment? We have accession negotiations theoretically with Turkey, but de facto nothing happens there. And I have the feeling that neither the EU nor Turkey really wants the Turkish EU membership any longer. It's a bit like an old couple. You know, they hate each other, but both sides wait that the other one says, "I divorce." You know, so that you can say, "Okay, it was you who wanted the divorce." You know, and then we have the Western Balkan countries, which is Serbia, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Albania.
And Kosovo.
Aha, yeah. Don't rush me. So these are the easier parts, you know. But even Montenegro, a nice small country, 750,000 people, so 2 city districts of Berlin, they have been negotiating for 10 years now. Yeah, it's really a nice, beautiful country, corrupt, everything you need. They even have the euro as currency, also legally, illegally, and but they have it. So then you have 2 more applicants which cause lots of problems. This is Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is, I don't know, is anybody from the region? So I have to be careful.
Kosovo here.
Okay, so Bosnia-Herzegovina, which is, if you allow me to say so, closer to be a failed state than to be a well-functioning democratic state. And this has to do with the fact that the different entities in Bosnia, none of them wants to be in this state, but everybody in the international community keeps them together and says, because if Bosnia-Herzegovina splits up, then a part goes to Serbia, okay, then a part goes to Hungary, what happens to the so-called Bosniaks? And then there is, of course, the question whether the Albanians in North Macedonia say, "Oh, that's a good idea," then we join Albania, and so everybody says, "Yeah, we know it's not working very well, but anyway, we pretend," you know. So, and the second problem is Kosovo. Kosovo is the problem because 5 countries of the European Union still have not recognized Kosovo as an independent state, which has nothing to do with Kosovo, by the way, but which has to do with the fear that if they recognize Kosovo as an independent state, that in their own country, Spain for example, the Catalans would say, "Haha, yeah, we also," you know. Same thing in Romania, that they're afraid that the Hungarians in Romania would say, "Okay," you know. So same thing in Greece with Cyprus. So. And this makes it very difficult, and the problem for Kosovo is, of course, that there's an obstacle they cannot do anything about. You know, this is the real problem. So the Kosovos, you know, they can, I don't know what, be the most democratic country in the world and dance naked on the table, and whatever you think could be nice. But nonetheless, they have the problem that other countries say no for their internal reasons. Sir.
What about the visa liberalization?
of Kosovo. There were 96 conditions which they completed all, and 5 years
Yeah.
is nothing.
Yeah, well, but
Is that fair, or what's your subject?
We danced naked, but nothing happened.
okay, I don't want to go to there. Don't want to go too much into the detail here. Yeah, visa liberalization is a problem. But I guess from what I heard is there's some negotiations now also between Kosovo and Serbia going on at the moment, so that there will be a fine solution, because it's completely, as you say, all the Western Balkan countries have visa liberalization, which means de facto they have a no visa liberalization, which means they can come without visa for up to 3 months, normal tourist stay, but Kosovo not, and Kosovo is negotiating. And once again, I mean, it's not, in this point, it's not that Kosovo is not meeting the criteria, it's just that others are blocking it. Let me just sum it up. Sorry, and I remember that you want to give me a call tonight and ask your question. So, enlargement. In general, the EU always says we are open for all European countries, although we don't have a clear definition what a European country is. But we can take them all. And therefore, the EU developed different approaches to European neighborhood policy and so on. I don't want to bore you with that at the moment. And then came the war. Russia's war against Ukraine. And for symbolic reasons now, the European Union said Ukraine and Moldova will also be candidates for the EU membership, and Georgia is on the way to become a candidate. This is an act of high symbolic meaning. I think it's very dangerous, because one thing is pretty clear. Even without the war and even without the destructions, it would take at least 15 years before Ukraine could join the European Union. I know the Ukraine pretty well. I traveled through all the country. I recorded from my passports. I had been there 22 times in all regions, always talking to the governor, because we were carrying out programs. I even hold an honorary doctorship from the Kiev University. So I'm really a friend of Ukraine, and I think I know the country quite well. But I tell you, even without the war and destruction, they're far away. But for symbolic reasons, same with Moldova. Moldova is much smaller, but lots of problem, rule of law, and so on. So here we are. Yes, we want to be the shining model for everybody. Yes, we are still attractive for the others, but we have problems to deliver. So, and therefore, so beyond Europe, if you not talk about Iceland, which is probably not part of Europe geographically, I don't know, but Iceland would be easy, 300,000 people, a couple of polar bears, so where's the problem? A stable democracy and so on, so everything is fine. If you not talk about Cyprus, which is partly anyway, which is also on the very margin, Turkey, but other countries, Kazakhstan, for example, the Kazakhs wanted to be at least part of the European neighborhood policy. Other countries, Armenia, the Russians wouldn't let the Armenians go. Azerbaijan, after Aliyev, for sure not with Mr. Aliyev, but the president, So this is very open. So yes, we are still the shining castle on the hill, but we have some problems to put up all the people who are attracted by this shine. Finally, you haven't believed that, huh? And now it's your turn. No.
Do you think it is possible that the EU will eventually remove countries from the Union? For example, Hungary.
Unfortunately, this is not possible. EU membership is like marriage in Ireland. There's no way back. And a country can leave the European Union, Article 50 of the treaty, and this is what the Brits did. but we cannot exclude a member. Every other institution can do that. Every football club can do that. We cannot do that. The only thing we could do is if a country violates the basic values of the EU, that we take their voting rights. So then they are a member without voting rights. But this is all we can do. But there's also a problem. You have to make such a decision unanimously. Unanimously -1. But now we have two problems, you know, Poland and Hungary. And the Poles and the Hungaries already said, we stick together, yeah? So the Poles say, we defend the Hungarians, and then you don't have all -1. And the Hungarians said, we defend the Poles, then you don't have all -1. So the suspension of the membership rights is I would say, a nuclear bomb. So, which means this is a weapon with which you threaten, but which you do not use. So, but you cannot exclude, you cannot say, okay, folks, now Carnival is over, get out. This is impossible. Excuse me.
Well, you basically answered my question, but I was going to say, what about Article 7? But also, what do you think will happen, like with Hungary and Poland?
What always happens, you know, we finally found a compromise. So the only thing we can do, and this was also a compromise, I mean, many member countries are quite fed up with the violations of the rule of law in Hungary and in Poland. So they said, okay, what we can do is we can withhold the money for them. And since they're both beneficiaries of the EU, which means they get more money back than they pay into the EU's cash box, this is an instrument. Then there was but you have to decide that unanimously. And so there was finally a compromise that we can withhold money if the expenses of the European Union in the country are affected. Now you could say, of course, you get a lot of EU money, but you have corruption, so there is a risk that the EU money is not administered properly, and therefore you don't get the money. This is what the Commission does at the moment with Hungary. Here we talk about 7.5 billion euro, which is a lot of money for Hungary. Hungary is a small country, you know. And so this is the only instrument we really have. And there is, I would say, a general feeling that we should do more about that. And then finally, I always hope that at the end of the day, also Mr. Orban and Mr. Kaczynski, who is the real leader in Poland, will not live forever. I mean, politically speaking, you know, that in Poland there are chances that the opposition could win the next elections. This is not sure. In Hungary, opposition is very difficult because this is really in a disastrous situation. But in the longer run, so the hope is you would say a three-point approach. First of all, withhold money. Then, second, find compromises. And third, hope for changes in these countries.
But you briefly said something about the collapse of the European Union or the EU failing during your lecture.
Really? Me?
No, I hallucinated. Okay, never mind.
No, it never collapses. And if I thought so, I wouldn't dare say that, you know.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not suicidal. Yeah? No, but I mean, if I may take up your question, of course, ladies and gentlemen, there is no guarantee for success. Yes, there is a risk that the EU does not collapse, but erodes. You know, and the biggest danger for that is not Putin. He normally is the biggest danger in everything, but in particular in Berlin. But the biggest danger is, of course, national populist movements in different countries. We just had the election in Italy, you know, where Giorgia Meloni, a post-fascist, in her own declaration, you know, took over and she said, "Ha-ha, European Union, the fun will be over." But then in her first statement, she said, okay, we of course will support the European Union and so on. which means we need the support of the European Union. And she says, well, we will fight for our interests. I mean, this is ridiculous because everybody does that. You know, the EU is not, as we in German say, the EU is kein Ponyhof. It's not a pony farm. You know, and I don't know whether a pony farm is completely peaceful. So all of the countries are fighting. That's not the point. The point is not that there are different interests. The point is not that there are harsh arguments. The point is that at the end of the day, we have to find a compromise and stick to this compromise, all of us. That's the point. And only if countries say, no, we don't do that, then we have a real problem. The rest is, you know, business as usual, I would say. Please.
So I'm thinking now with the global events taking place, also with Ukraine and Russia and all the other crises in the world. I believe it's becoming more and more important to have a unified Europe and to have also for like global power dynamics. But at the same time, I mean, we can see that the EU is not having an easy time and there's a lot of crises. But my question would be, how do you see the future of the EU? Do you see something similar to like the United States in that sense? Or how do you envision?
The future of the EU is brilliant. The only problem is we have to get there. And so
how do you see it?
yeah. So what I'm seeing is that at the end of the day, the EU is sticking together much more than it did before. And there are two important examples. The first is the fund Next Generation EU. This also sounds like public relations, the title is of course, but what does it mean? It means that the EU set aside 750 billion euro. This is real money. In prices of 2018. In the meantime, it's 840 something, 14 something. Set aside for the recovery of the member states from the pandemic crisis. And for the first time, the EU was entitled to issue their own loans, you know, to make debts. This, for many years, some member states, and Germany among them, said never, never, never. EU didn't have a single euro debt because it only could live on the money it was given to it by the member states. And now, even the Dutch and the Germans and the Finns and the Austrians agreed on the fact that the EU is issuing their own loans, generating money, 750 billion euro for the recovery of the member states from the pandemic, and at the same time for the not only renovation but innovation and also climate neutral innovation. So this is a real step. The other step is, you know, the European Union, ladies and gentlemen, is a superpower. You know, we are one of the biggest economic communities. We have more soldiers than the United States of America. We have one seat in the French seat in the Security Council. We're the biggest donor of developing aid. So the EU is a superpower. The problem is nobody notices it, not even the EU. And, but at the moment we see it's not enough to have a global strategy and a security strategy, but we really have to do something. And there's a new document which is really, really, really interesting from March of this year. Yes, March of this year. And this is the strategic compass. And the strategic compass means more cooperation in the military field, more investment in the military field. And the new thing about the strategic compass is, for the first time, it has clear benchmarks. You know, it's a difference whether I say I have a global strategy, you know, I want to lose 20 pounds. Just an example, I don't need that. Yeah? So, okay, and then I can say I have a good idea now, I want to lose weight and blah, and this is healthy, blah, blah, blah. Okay. But now you have a benchmark, and the benchmark would say, okay, by the end of the month, you have to lose 2 pounds. and by the end of next month you have to lose 5 pounds, and then you can measure it and evaluate it. So this strategic compass is really a new step forward in bringing the EU also in military terms together. You have to understand, you don't have to, but you better do, that in the beginning the EU was not seen as a military power. When the 6 countries originally came together, foreign policy and defense didn't play a role. It was all about internal affairs. And it took a while, till the 1990s, that the EU developed a foreign policy and said, and maybe one day we also could cooperate in military policy, in defense policy. And now we have this strategic compass. So what I'm thinking, not as a propaganda speaker here of the European Parliament, yes, I think in 10 years from now, in spite of all the risks we have, and there are risks, I think the EU will be better off than today. And now you could be very polemic. You could say the founding father, but don't quote me on that. Politically speaking, the founding father of the European Union is Adolf Hitler. You know, so because as a response to National Socialism, to the war, to dictatorship, the EU came into existence. It was not overboarding love. And now you could say the biggest supporter of European unification is Vladimir Putin. You know, so it costs a high price, in particular the Ukrainians at the moment, you know. But at the end of the day, you know, what was it, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, when Emmanuel Macron called the NATO brain dead, when you had an American president who said NATO is obsolete, you know. By the way, I wish him a nice retirement. And, you know, we all in Europe do, by the way, you know, so he really should enjoy Mar-a-Lago till the end of his days. But this is all over. This is all over. Now we say NATO is important. You know, we had we have in German a term, Zeitenwende. Our chancellor came up with that. Zeitenwende means a turn of times. And he declared that 3 days after the Russian invasion into Ukraine, that Zeitenwende, turn of times. Now the Zeitenwende is, in many respects, absolutely ridiculous. Because he said we from now on will pay 2% of our GDP for defense. And this is ridiculous because we signed that in 2014, but the Germans never thought of doing it. You know, and suddenly the Zeitenwende, the turn of times, is we do it. You know, so because we all saw and see that we have a very difficult situation in the European Union, that the only way is to get through this situation is by sticking together. Okay, you always have member states which say, MIB could have an extra benefit, and if, you know, the others don't buy Russian gas, or the Meloni just said, and we can buy Russian gas again, gets it a bit cheaper, and so on. But I think in the long run, this will not happen. Please.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. I think it's really cool, but as I was wanting to comment on something I thought you said, which I thought was super interesting, as the EU coming sort of into life as a response to National Socialism. Do you think, like, with like the newer generations of Europeans, there's going to be more of a European identity versus a nationalistic member identity of the EU members, like as like for example, let's say people who are now kids, when they come into adulthood, maybe become parliament members or so, would they have more affinity would they identify more as Europeans than, let's say, French or German or half?
This is the $100,000 question. And so, yes and no, and but. So, when the EU was founded, the European communities, sorry for repeating myself, and then I release you, you know. It was about peace between Germany and France, peace among the member states. We were not talking about peace in South Sudan or whatever, you know, or Syria, member states. And this was obvious for everybody, and this was the glue which kept the EU together. My father, I'm old enough to tell personal stories now. My father was born in 1902. First World War, Second World War. You know, he never understood the European communities in the details, but he didn't care. He didn't care. He knew this is about peace, and this is it. You know, my kids, which are not that small anymore, you know, they're next month 34 and 37. But they both have, beside the German high school diploma, they have the French baccalaureate. They're fluent in French. And if I told them, hey kids, you have to support the EU so that the French are not afraid of us, they would say, if the French are afraid of us, then they should see a doctor. Then they could see my daughters, who one is a psychologist, the other one is an emergency doctor. So they're in very good hands. So what I'm saying is this is no longer the clue. And for the next generation, those who are 18 or 20 now, with 18 you have full voting rights, you know. So this is one side. So this makes it more difficult because for a long time we had what we call in political science a so-called permissive consensus, which meant that people said, we don't know what you're doing, but we support it. You know, because, my father, it's about peace and how this works with the steel quota or agricultural policy. He didn't care. This permissive consensus does not exist anymore. So this makes it more difficult. On the other hand, yes, of course, the new generation is self-understood European, you know? So when I went to university, I didn't have a single friend, not a single one. I had friends, but I had not a single one who had studied abroad. Not a single one. I had a girlfriend once who was as a school student in the US for 1 year. This already existed, but all the rest did not exist. Now I'm teaching political science here at the Free University. I don't have a single student in my seminars who has not studied abroad or is abroad now because he or she is a foreigner. So this is self-understood. So I would say yes, I'd say the new generation is much more pro-European, but they don't think about that. You know, I mean, if you go to the washroom and you wash your hands, you don't think how great it is to have running water. I mean, this is self-understood. You know, you don't fall on your knees and say, "Oh, thank you, we have running water here." So in this sense, you know, this is what I mean. They're more self-understood Europeans. And this is a good sign, but the problem is we have to make sure we have a vast students exchange program. This is Erasmus. Maybe some of you have heard about that. But the problem is we don't only have the Erasmus generation, but also the EasyJet generation. So these are the kids who fly to, let's say, Spain, and then for 1 week they drink tequila by the liters, or not tequila, what is this called, this mixture? Anyway, and sangria, yeah? And then they fly home, and they were in another European country, and they were traveling without passport and everything, but they didn't get much of it. So, but generally speaking, yes. Please.
So I'm someone from the UK, unfortunately.
Pardon me, please speak up.
So I'm from the UK, my accent is from away.
Okay, what a fate, huh? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm
Yeah.
I'm just curious, I myself wasn't old enough to go to the election, but with the growing sort of movements about like leaving the EU to sort of like Sweden, for example, where do you think this is coming from in terms of if there are so many, I do agree with the strengths and the positives that the EU brings about, but I wonder what your opinion is on those that maybe think otherwise and where this is coming from.
Sorry, I didn't get that acoustically, really. So could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so my main point was that
Speak up. Where is the British voice? The voice of the British mind.
I myself see a lot of the strengths and advantages, and I completely understand why the agreement exists, and I do wish I was still a part of it. But then I'm curious as to why you think like the UK exited, as well as the growing movement with Sweden, for example, having a similar progression being made in their future.
Yeah. Okay, yes, please.
Can I just add to that?
Yes,
Sorry,
yes, please.
also being from the UK. What do you think are the most important long-term implications of the UK leaving?
Well, first of all, now for the UK, I have two answers. A more polemic one and a serious one. The polemic one is, from the German experience, it's easier to lose a war as loser than to lose a war as winner. And this is what happened to the UK. You know, because the US was losing its importance, but they never realized it because they think as long as they have the Queen on 65 different stamps in different countries, they're world power, and they're not. So, and this feeling of exceptionality played, I think, a role. I really mean that. But now, serious, Great Britain, so United Kingdom, you know, always had problems with the supranationality. And I would say the British membership in the EU was a misunderstanding from the beginning, from both sides. The British thought that all this talking about ever closer union, which we already had in the Roman treaties, is not meant seriously. At the end of the day, it's just a free trade zone. So they had the illusion that the continental Europeans didn't really mean it with an ever closer union. The continental Europeans had the illusion that once the British are at the table, they will see how wonderful this is in this family, and they will give up their concerns about sovereignty. So sovereignty plays, you know much better than I do, I'm just a newspaper reader, plays an important role. You know, to have sovereignty. Now, they have some problems with the sovereignty because they have a sovereignty of migration. Now they have no workers. Okay, yeah, it happens. I think this was a sovereignty issue. Interesting thing is, when the Brits decided, or the majority of those who took part in the referendum decided to leave the European Union, there was, of course, the fear that other countries could follow. You mentioned Sweden. You could think of Denmark. Denmark joined the European communities in 1973 because of the Brits. Because they said, and I'm not kidding, they said, okay, if the British join the European community, then it can't become that bad. As far as integration, I really mean that. And but no other country ever considered leaving the EU, and those countries who annoy us most, they stick strongest to the EU membership. And so I think this is not an example, and I think the evaluation of the Brexit has not been done yet, because from what we see, there's a couple of negative effects on the British economy, but this was overlaid now by the pandemic and now by the war. So you cannot say this is the Brexit and this is war and this is pandemic. And so we'll see in the longer run. But what turned out was that in the beginning, Boris Johnson said, I have trade treaties with all the world, the United States, our best friend, and the United States showed him the finger and said, no, we're not interested in such a trade agreement. You know, so it's not that easy. And so there is no other country, also as far as I see it in internal discussions, following this example. Of course, you have in all countries also parties who say we should leave. Oh, this is the commercial here. We should leave the EU. We have in Germany a party, the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, which has in their program that Germany should leave the EU, but this is marginal, you know. So, in this respect, but what the long-term consequences are, whether Great Britain will be better off with the EU membership, without EU membership, we could see in 10 or 20 years. What we see at the moment also is they have some problems with the Scots. that the Scottish say, well, we voted for being part of the United Kingdom because of the EU membership, and now what do we get? A non-EU membership, and therefore the Scottish are now asking for a new referendum and say we want a new referendum, and at least many Scottish leaders have the idea to say we leave United Kingdom and join the European Union, you know, which theoretically would be possible, of course. So, on verra, as the British say. We'll see. Okay, any other? Yes, please. Ladies first.
I just want to know your perspective of being EU citizenship over like a national.
You mean, am I?
Being a person being EU citizen.
Yeah. Well,
What's your perspective?
well, you know, folks, each of us has a couple of identities, which in sometimes play a role, sometimes don't play a role. You're a woman. In some respects, this is very important. In others, it doesn't count. You are a bike rider. In some respects, this is important. In other respects, it doesn't play any role, and so on and so on. So there is no contradiction between a European identity and a German or French or Polish or whatsoever identity. And the vast majority of our citizens, and this can be proved by opinion polls, see themselves as national and European citizens. Legally, I have, beside my German citizenship, also a European citizenship, which gives me some rights, which for me as a German are not that important. For example, the right to seek protection by another EU embassy in another country if my country is not represented there. For the Germans, this is more theoretical because we're a big country, we have embassies everywhere. You know, but if you're Estonian and you end up in, I don't know what, Nigeria or wherever, and you need protection, then you also could refer to the German embassy or the French embassy and say, here, I'm a European citizen, you know, and help me. And so, speaking for myself, yes, I'm a German and I'm a European. The EU concept, sorry, you asked for it. I don't have any plans for tonight. There's an American concept. The American concept is melting pot, which means you put Italians and Chinese and Koreans and Africans and whoever in this melting pot, and then it melts, and then at the end you have Americans, you know, melting pot. The EU concept is different. Our slogan is unity in diversity. This is why we have 24 official languages in the EU, which for organizational reasons is a disaster. But it makes sense because we say we want every citizen to approach the European Union in his mother tongue, or at least in his official language, because in Spain you could say, well, I speak Catalan or Mallorquin and blah, 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 but official language. So the EU is not a melting pot. The EU is a soup bowl, you could say, where you have all the different ingredients, you know, and they together give the taste. And we want to keep it like that, and therefore it's not a contradiction to be European and German, you know, or to be European and to Polish or whatsoever, you know. So, and most people think that way, and then of course we also have, I think you cannot, last remark, don't believe all promises. We have these small instruments to build identity. I don't know whether you saw our license plates at the cars. The license plate says European Union, and then it says D for Germany. You know, if you come at the airport, which in Berlin you should avoid, but so generally speaking, then at the passport check you have a line EU citizens and other passports. You better go to EU citizens because other passports takes 3 times the time. You know, because as a EU citizen, it's easy for me. If there is a control anyway, if you travel in the Schengen area, you don't have any controls anyway. So, and this, of course, the currency. Of course, if you look into your wallet, if you see anything, then you see Europe. You know, the European Union. The currency union has 19 members, and from 1st of January on 20, because Croatia is joining. So, yes?
What does the culture remain?
What
does the culture of like one region, does it remain? Does it stand there?
Sorry, I didn't get you.
Like culture.
Yes? Don't blame me for that. I mean, what could I do about it?
Like it's like Ukrainian
Yeah, yeah.
like
Yeah.
does it stand?
Yeah, well, the Ukrainians. Yeah, that's
Or
a different.
any other country,
It's very different, you know, because we have about 1 million immigrants from Ukraine at the moment in Germany, and this does not create many problems. So, because the Ukrainians are Europeans, they are Christians, most of them Orthodox, but who cares, you know, and so they have you could say the same cultural background. So for them it's much easier to integrate here, to be accepted, if to be frank and honest, than immigrants we have from other countries, from other parts of the world who have a different religion, who have a different religious background. I don't say this is nice, and don't get me wrong, but I've just described the situation, you know. And another point, just to sum that up, a difference, of course, between the Ukrainian refugees and the refugees, let's say, from Syria or Afghanistan, or what we have is the Ukrainian refugees don't want to stay. They want to go back, most of them. Whether this really will happen has also to do with the length of the war, we know that, but they don't come to stay. Refugees from other parts of the world come to stay. They're looking for a better life, and they want to stay here. The Ukrainians say we're here because our house is shelled, but as soon as possible we want to go back. Has at the moment also to do with the fact, of course, that men under 60 are not allowed to leave the country, with some exceptions. So mostly you have here women and children, you know. We have over 100,000 Ukrainian children in our schools in the meantime, you know. And but Ukrainians is relatively easy, and they're mostly welcome. You everywhere see the Ukrainian flag, except over there because there's the Russian embassy. And but with other immigrants and refugees, for them it's much more difficult. That's a different story. Yes, please.
I would just like to say that most immigrants don't want to stay. They would love to stay in their country. A lot of people want to stay in their own country. It's just that the country is torn apart, whether it be a war. You said you named Syria and some other countries. You can't stay in those countries. You know, if it was stable, they would most definitely like to stay. Yes, it's not like they don't just. I mean, if we were to say Russia, the Ukrainian war right now, and other immigrants, we don't know when the war is going to end for Ukraine. They might stay forever. So I think we all go to different countries for a better opportunity in some cases, but we also would rather stay home. I mean, everybody has their nationality.
Of course, yes. I would not question that. But nonetheless, I would say many people who come from other parts of the world, also because they don't have the hope that the living conditions in their country would change in a way that they could have a decent life there, want to stay, while the Ukrainians still have the hope and say, well, next year this war will be over, and then we go back. And of course, I mean, they get much more support here, and the country, there was already a conference now on the rebuilding of Ukraine, although the war is still going on. There's a much more solidarity for the Ukrainians than there is for other countries in war. You don't have to like that, but this is as it is. Yeah? Please.
I would like to ask, could it be deliberate that the EU did not come up with an official language, but we successfully managed to come up with the current.
Well, the language has to do with identity, and therefore the EU always said we want to preserve also national identities. We don't want to dissolve them, and therefore we have the 24 languages. As a matter of fact, you have in the EU 3 working languages, which is German, French, and English. And at the very end, you have 1 working language. And this is the language of the country which left the European Union, you know? So I'm just filing an application for an institution for a European fund, and they say only in English, you know? Maybe I could go to the European Court and question that, but I think it's faster to learn English than to do that. So the idea is preserve the identities. I mean, language, you folks all know that. Language is, of course, identity. Preserve that. You all should should feel at home in the EU, and therefore your language is at home in the EU. But for practical reasons, it's German, French, and English, and it's more French and English because the Germans always speak English and want to speak English, you know, and because the Germans don't want to be Germans. Let's go back to 45, yeah, I really mean that. And so it's French and English, but since more people speak English than French, at the very end, it's English. Okay, folks, I think our hour is over. And you should have some time to see the exhibition downstairs. And this closes at 6. And then you have to do what you want, I guess. I don't know. Yes. Which is the worst threat in German. If you really have a harsh argument with somebody and you don't know what to say anymore, then you say, do what you want. So this is the worst thing which can happen to a German, you know, that he has to do what he wants or what she wants. Okay, I hope you have more fun with doing what you want, or you have to do what Mark Johnfried wants, who knows. Yes?
Sorry for taking you back a bit. What would be the reason for the Britain exiting the EU?
For the British exit? Yeah, well, we discussed that briefly. I think the basic line of the Brexit, of the British exit is, as I said, that Great Britain, the United Kingdom, does not want to give up national sovereignty. And this is in conflict with this principle of supranationality. And that the British say, or a majority says, we're not talking about 100%, say we're better off if we can make all our decisions, or as a former politician of Great Britain called it, or we don't want to be governed by a fax machine from Brussels. So, okay, as I said, supranationality gives you more influence on others and less influence on your own affairs. You have to accept that. Once again, it's like marriage. You know, if you don't want to make these compromises, stay single. Yeah.
Could migration be part of it?
Yeah, migration was part of it, and very last remark. But the internal migration, because you know, in the European Union we have the single market, which means all our people are free to move to every country in the Union and work there. Single market. And what we had, so as far as migration from third countries was concerned, this was not a point with Great Britain, because the British always were very restrictive. But what they could not do anything about is migration from EU citizens. So there were many Poles, for example, in Romanians also, so people from the poorer countries who moved to Great Britain said, okay, I make a better living there than at home. So migration was a topic, but not the migration from third countries, but the internal migration within the single market. And if you ride a subway, for example, then you will notice there are many people who speak other languages, or many young people who speak Spanish, who obviously are no tourists, you know, and but they came here to work because Spain had a very high unemployment rate and still has, and they came here. But they have the same rights to work and to stay as I as a German have, or as I as a German would have in Spain or in Poland or in Portugal. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.